this whole thing could have been avoided if Hollywood writers would just go to therapy. Let's talk about I Know What You Did Last Summer.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. So, today we're going to be reviewing I Know What You Did Last Summer. But before we get into that, you already know what time it is. Movie recommendation time. So, guys, what is the best thing we've seen recently?
So I don't have a movie recommendation. I have something that you definitely shouldn't watch, and that is The Old Guard 2 on Netflix. And that's such a big disappointment, because I actually really liked the first one. I can't remember, I watched it about like 5 years ago. I really enjoyed it. It was, just like different, great action, great characters. And I just kind of like half liked the story. It was just like a typical Netflix movie, but done well. The sequel now, and this is what I've been waiting for a while. The sequel, Jesus, had no plot, no real character development in there, a whole bunch of exposition explaining how things work. And the most egregious thing of all is it didn't have a third act. It didn't have a final act. It just ends abruptly and sets up a third movie as if anyone even wants to watch the third movie at this point. It's literally completely killed all goodwill that I had in the franchise. Is completely gone. It feels like they had, and this has been sitting on the shelf for a number of years now, but it feels like they had multiple different ideas for the story, didn't know which one to pick, kind of picked both, and did it really badly. I don't know, they just like lost so much aura in the sequel. Like, even like the action and the choreography and all that was just so much worse than it was in the first, and everything felt a little bit more wooden and a lot more stale. It's going to be on my list of most disappointing movies of the year, just because of how much I was looking forward to the sequel and how much I was waiting for it to come out, knowing that it was sat on the shelf. But now I understand why Netflix held it back for as long as they did. It's a disaster. Probably one of the worst things I watched this year.
It's weird. I remember like 2 years ago, Netflix was turning out one stinker after the other, and I kind of have stopped hearing about those. So I figured, okay, maybe somebody else is in charge now, or maybe they got their act together, but it sounds like not.
I think this actually might be a holdover from that period, just because, again, this was, from reports, it was shot and completed a number of years ago, but they just didn't release it. They just held on to it. And maybe they were doing reshoots, maybe they're trying to fix it and save it, but if they were, they failed in doing so.
Before I even say what I'm going to recommend, let me just shout out Amazon real quick, because Amazon, you've been dropping gems. I actually watched this Apple series on Amazon, because sometimes what they do, they'll show one episode, like the first episode of a series, like they do with Paramount, they do with, like, I even watched Mobland on there. So yeah, it's actually a good marketing strategy or whatever. But yeah, I watched is Your Friends and Neighbors. I believe that's what it's called. That is a really, really good series. It's about a guy that ends up getting fired from, I think he used to work in like some hedge fund type of company, and he ends up getting fired, kind of like set up in a way. And then he ends up becoming a thief, as in like literally he ends up robbing his friends, because obviously the community that they live in, there's hardly any crime. So literally just ends up robbing them at night time, obviously when they're not there, steals their possessions, and then he ends up getting into like sticky situations in the future throughout the series. And yeah, it's just, I can't lie, this one is a fun watch. And I think this is what people refer to when they say Apple has like really, really high quality good stuff. Because I've always thought, not always, I like quite a few of Apple TV shows and movies. However, I feel like with Apple, their series are very, very slow. So I have kind of like mixed feelings when it comes to them. But when they have but for the good stuff, like the really good stuff, like shout out to C, that's a really good series as well if you haven't seen it. But when you watch their good stuff is really, really good. It's called Your Friends and Neighbors. Yes, I would definitely recommend for you guys to go. That one is funny. It's great story. This might go down as one of my favorites when it comes to just that whole genre, dark comedy. I think I'm gonna become a dark comedy fan now.
The best thing I watched this week is Mr. Belvedere, which is a 1985 sitcom. Now, I'd seen a whole bunch of episodes of this as I was growing up. It kind of ran on reruns in Germany in the 90s. It's essentially the story of this American family living in Pittsburgh, and they need some help running the household, and so they hire a housekeeper, and the housekeeper turns out to be this 50, 60-year-old upper-class British guy who has this impressive resume, which include, like, his references include Winston Churchill. Like, he's the most English guy ever, and he basically becomes the housekeeper of this American family who is not used to having housekeepers, and 2 is kind of a little bit of a mess, and Mr. Belvedere essentially cleans up after them in more ways than one. Basically, I had not seen an episode of this in like 25 years. I kind of vaguely remembered it as being fun, and I kind of stumbled onto it on YouTube. And I said, okay, let's watch an episode of this, see if this is any good. It's probably not. 80s sitcoms are very hit and miss. Many of them are not as good as you remember them from watching them at age 12. But this one actually was quite good. I watched like 5 or 6 episodes, and it's actually quite well done. As far as sitcoms go, especially from that time, it's pretty smart, and it's well written, and it was a good time. So that's my recommendation for the week.
So, it's time for the main event. I Know What You Did Last Summer. Danny G, please, can you give us a synopsis?
So, I Know What You Did Last Summer is a slasher movie which picks up from the 1997 original. It follows the story of 5 friends who reunite in the seaside town of Southport for the wedding of 2 people in their friend group. In a late night joyride, they have an accident in which somebody dies, much like in the first movie. They believe that person died. They decide to not go to the police. And a year later, they start getting messages that somebody knows what they did last summer, and a guy in a fisherman's costume starts coming after them and starts killing them one by one, essentially recreating the events of the first movie. And so they now have to survive and figure out who's coming after them and what to do about it. So what did we think of I Know What You Did Last Summer?
It actually started off really good. I was surprised that it started off really good. But then, when I say it started off really good, I mean the tone. Because I think an issue, not even an issue that I have with slashers, I just think a lot of times slashers, I find them like the tone of it feels very immature, even though it's in a dark setting. But with this one, it felt kind of mature. Like the actors were acting realistic, mature. There wasn't really much immaturity going around in terms of like just the way that the performance was and just the way that the tone was set. That it just felt like a realistic environment. Like I could see the realism is what I'm trying to say, right? So it started off good, even when they got into the accident. Like just like the whole, I'd say, first act, I was all for it. I was like, okay, this is looking like a good movie. And after that, it had moments where it was good, but overall, it just felt flat. And then especially the way that it ended, I was kind of annoyed at the ending. I was like, I wouldn't say they ruined their film, but I would say they started off so well. It could have been a really good film, but then they just sabotaged themselves. Overall, my experience with this film was underwhelming.
They need to get their legacy characters out of this movie. They need to move on from nostalgia, because I feel like this is part of what held this movie back. And it's not the only reason, but it was just so stupid in trying to make everything feel like the first movie and sort of trying to bring character back and just trying to recreate a feel as opposed to modernizing it and giving it a fresh coat of paint and making it feel new and making it feel exciting. And also, when did we become so soft? Like when did we as the audience become so soft? And there probably is an answer to that. But it's like the accident at the start, really, like that's what they felt guilty over, is someone that was a terrible. I have no apathy for terrible drivers. That person was clearly a terrible driver. Essentially, the thing that they felt guilty about and felt that they needed to hide was the most dumb thing possible. And that immediately took me out of the movie, because I was like, why are you going through all these lengths? Like, surely you could have just called the police. It's not that deep. It's not as if you really didn't do anything that bad. And even if you needed to lie a little bit about what really happened, you could have done so and it would have been fine. Like, the whole setup was just ridiculous from the get-go. The characters in this were okay at best. I don't think there was anything, egregious about them, but there wasn't anything special about any of the characters as well. Like with all these movies, the most boring and the most uninteresting one is always the main one that they make us follow for whatever reason. It happened in this one, happened in Final Destination. It's like all the other characters around that person are more interesting and more entertaining than the one that we're following. What I did like actually is that they gave the fisherman presence in this movie. Like you felt his presence. You can feel, like with the sound effects that they did with the boots, every time he was approaching someone, you could kind of feel the weight of them, and they did as best as they could for the fisherman, because there really isn't anything else that impressive about him. So with that, I'll give him a little bit of praise for. but at the same time, they did make him feel a bit silly and a bit slack. So it's really weird. It's like at a certain point, he feels serious, he feels menacing, he feels a threat. And then when the script needs someone to survive, he turns a bit goofy and silly, and all of a sudden it's a bit cartoonish. You can kind of explain that with the ending and the reveal of who it was at the end, but yeah, I don't know. It just seemed a bit stupid how he kind of flipped from being very sure and assertive on the kills that he was getting to just being a bit all over the place. Lastly, the reveal was extremely underwhelming. Extremely underwhelming. Like, the movie was kind of sitting on the knife edge for me in terms of like, okay, this is all right. And then when we got the reveal, I was like, okay, nah, I can't look at this movie. This movie is terrible. I'm not a fan of it. I'm not a fan of the choice that they made for it. And I don't know who else they could have picked. Of course, we'll get onto the reveal and who the killers were, etc. But I was just like, I don't know. It just didn't work. And at certain points in the movie, it felt obvious. And then when you look at other parts of the movie, you're like, okay, this is clearly a script that was reworked, and there's certain scenes that don't make sense, but they've kind of like reworked the movie to have the killer be someone else than they maybe originally intended. If not, then it's just bad directing and bad acting. The reveals are underwhelming. It doesn't make sense. If you think about it for the movie and the killer, it also doesn't make sense how they act and how they've sort of maneuvered in one particular scene as well. So that's kind of what I'll say on that. Overall, super disappointing and managed to be worse than the first movie, which was already mediocre at best.
I was actually watching this movie with a fairly large crowd, and it was mostly older people, which seemed to be people who liked the original movie in 1997 and wanted to see the next one, which is not neither here nor there. It's more an observation. But I did have like a group of teenagers sitting behind me who were doing a thing that I really find annoying, which is whenever I go see like a horror movie, there's always a group of teenagers in the back who think it's funny, who go to horror movies just to laugh at them, even if it's something like an elevated horror movie or something like that. It's just a thing that happens every time. And for the first 2/3 of this movie, I was annoyed with them because they just kept laughing and they kept pointing out how bad this was to each other. And then I kind of defected around the 2/3 mark when the movie really got stupid. Because up to that point, I was kind of into it. It was like the characters were likable enough, like they were unlikable in just the right way. The setup was interesting, or at least acceptable. And then at around the 2/3 mark, characters start doing extremely stupid stuff, even by the genre standards, and it just makes no sense, and it killed any kind of investment I had in the movie. And then that culminates in a pretty weak resolution in the end, where it's revealed who the killer is. And by that point, I was totally with them. I had gotten up from my seat, walked back 2 rows, and sat next to them, and we were spiritually tearing into the movie together. It's like I was totally on board with them at that point. Like, there was no respecting the movie towards the end. There was no engaging with it. There was no taking it seriously, which is really a shame, because actually I thought it started off pretty strong. Let's talk about it.
So I think we all pretty much agree with each other that, well, except for Heather, you don't really like the beginning, but I think we're similar in the opinion that the beginning, like the first half of the film was way different from the second half of the film in terms of quality. And I kind of agree with, and I think Kirby might have touched on a bit. I might have to agree with this opinion where they must have added stuff to the script, because that's what it felt like. Especially, like, I think what topped it off, like when I felt like there was just two, like I was watching two movies, was when the killer was fighting, what's his name? The guy with the rich dad that covered it up.
I think it's something Teddy.
Yeah, it's Teddy.
His death, I was like, what the hell? Like, he had him down, like he got the murderer down, and then he left him crawling back to his house and then ended up dying. That was just like, what a stupid decision that was going on. So firstly, do you guys feel like they were adding on stuff to the script?
So what it felt to me like was I was watching a series of a show, and they changed directors at episode 5, something like that. Like the feel of it, the tone of it, the way anything happened, the way characters acted was so completely different. Because actually I can pinpoint the exact moment where I realized we were heading down the wrong path, which is when Ava and Tyler go to this abandoned, I don't know what it was. It was a restaurant or something. They kind of poke around, and then Ava gets trapped in this cage. So first of all, the fisherman somehow knows where they are and goes after them in this location. And then like a cage drops from the ceiling and pins Ava in place. And the only way she can escape is to manually unscrew the screws that are holding the two parts of the cage together, which obviously takes the entire time. And during that time, the podcaster Tyler dies, right? Is killed. And actually kind of like the way Tyler dies. Maybe like I think there are a couple of really decent kills in this. And one of them is when she's kind of on this, I don't know what it's called, this elevator, like this manual elevator kind of thing, like a freight elevator of some kind. The guy holds the platform back with the hook, and she kicks at the platform, and she has to lift herself up, which is very, very difficult, obviously, to do. And during that time, she dies, right? And then Ava escapes because it took that long to manually unscrew the screws of the cage. Unless I missed something, it's just a cage standing on a floor. It did not seem to kind of snap into anything or anything like that. So I have no idea why she couldn't lift the cage. And if there was a reason, then the movie didn't convince me of it and didn't point it out to me.
And that's the problem. I feel like the film was just inconsistent, and that's why I said it had good moments after the beginning. Because at the beginning, I kind of disagreed with what Hervey said in terms of like the beginning didn't make sense, and the guy was a bad driver. Because you could say he was a bad driver, but at the end of the day, someone's standing in the middle of the road, and I know when you're driving those type of roads, you're not really even though you should drive carefully, you're not really expecting anyone to be standing in the middle of it. So I think the setup was fine. I think like it was a good setup, but I do hear where you're coming from.
It's called like accident point or something like this, right? Something stupid. Like this is the place where people die. And they manage to stand there just because you get a great view of the fireworks. You don't get a great view 10 meters to the side.
Even on top of that, like how easy is it to say that there was an animal in the road or something, like they were coming from the other direction and there was an animal and he swerved and he went off the road or something along those lines. It was just like, there were like 101 ways to explain how this person crashed without saying that someone was standing in the middle of the road, which is why I just never bought it. And I never like felt that they really needed to hide this or felt that they needed to make a pact that no one ever speaks about it. It was just like the setup so stupid. And again, the reason why I say have we gone so soft is that in the previous time, in the olden days, like again with the first movie, is that yes, it was an accident the first time round, but the person was still alive as they were dunking the person in the river, and then they made the conscious effort to be like they're going to follow through with it essentially, and it was a little bit more darker, and they had more reason to be like, oh, no one should ever speak about this ever again, and you shouldn't tell anyone, and we're going to keep this to our grave. In this movie, I just felt like they weren't brave enough to make the characters or like they didn't feel like the audience would react well to the characters actually having to make a dark choice. I never bought into it. I never believed it. And that was a bad setup for the movie in the first place. And I know, Daniel, you said that you liked the way that Tyler died in this movie. For me, it was fine, but then it was just the fact that she said you at the end, and then you just immediately narrow it down to a few people. You're like, okay, like who has she interacted with, and what has she been actually studying, and why has she been here in the first place? And you're like, okay, it can only be a few people, which was like, okay, you kind of gave away your movie.
Wait, no, that was good though, because technically the only one that we saw her interact with was, what's her name? The girl's ex-boyfriend when she was driving in a car with her. That's the only person that we've seen her communicate with. What's his name?
Milo. But then yeah. But then, okay, so we see her communicate with him.
Yeah.
But then she's there because of the Hook murders that happened 30 years ago. So then the minute you start to introduce legacy characters into the story, you're like, okay, these are the only other people that she knew in this town, as opposed to Ava and Milo in the story. So then it becomes a bit obvious, like, okay, if it's not him because he's being killed, then it has to be one of the legacy characters, which is a bit like, okay, like I understand why you tried to do it, because you tried to have like this like suspense moment, like, oh, like she knew who the killer was and like you meant to keep us guessing, but it's just like you've completely narrowed it down. And even to like add to that as well, like the way that they handled all of the red herrings in this movie, it's like it's too on the nose, it's too in your face that you don't believe that this person is the actual killer. So like the pastor, for example, they make him extra creepy. They dial it up to 100. And like, I'm not the biggest like lover of like murder mysteries and stuff like that. Of course, like the recent ones I've watched are, Glass Onion and stuff like that. But it seems like there's a right way to do it. Anytime you introduce a brand new character and they're interacting with your protagonist in the story, and their intensity is on 100 and it's dialed all the way up, and everything that they say sounds menacing, it's like, clearly it's not this person. Like, clearly you're trying to throw us for a loop, and it's not this person. It's just like, it just doesn't work. It doesn't work the way that you want it to work in the movie when you make it so obvious it's not this person, or when you try to convince us so much that it's this person that it's not.
And the original kind of had this mystery going on, but there was never any real question about who the fisherman was, right? And here we're turning it kind of into this big gotcha kind of reveal, and I don't know. I don't know that works. I don't know that we gain very much by turning it into this kind of surprise reveal.
The reason why I think they did that is because they were trying to carve out their own original story while also paying homage to obviously original film. So in a way, they're just trying to create a new formula. So I do understand where you guys are coming from, and I do hear it, but I just think they were just pretty much trying to create their own identity while kind of staying in line with already, the original IP.
They're trying very hard to stick to the formula, right? You still have the teenagers or young people. You still have the accident. You still have the cover up. You still have the messages, right? And there's actually an in-story justification for why all of these things are repeating. And at least early on in the movie, I was kind of thinking to myself, why is this happening again 30 years later? And we do get an answer to that, right? But I think they are trying to stay very, very close to the formula, but then they depart from it in a couple of ways that I don't think make the story stronger, because by making it this big reveal about who the fisherman is, you're kind of implying that there was a mystery. You're kind of implying that there was something to figure out, and if you watch it again, there are clues, and it's satisfying, all of that. I don't think that's the case.
But where's the evolution, though? Because if it's a thing where they continued kind of like following the old formula, then I'm sure people would have complained, oh, well, we're just watching I Know What You Did Last Summer, 1997 or 1998, whenever it came out.
There was one in 97 and one in 1988, so you're on target.
Okay, cool.
Here's my take on that. They just stop, just kill the franchise here, because they clearly don't have the right direction for it. But what I was going to say to what Daniel said as well was, again, it didn't feel like a murder mystery. And what's frustrating about this, and we kind of discussed it on the last video we did about the original in 1997, is that, it's one of the first slashes where they're trying to uncover and they're trying to, do some investigating as to who the fisherman is. And in this movie, it never really feels like we get anywhere close with the protagonist anyways. It never feels like we get anywhere close to identifying who it is. It's not like we're making any progress with them. It just feels like we're kind of checking boxes by okay, we're checking this person, we're checking this person, or whatever like that. But there isn't that progression to, the mystery. There isn't, clues there. There isn't anything being solved. There isn't any links. It's just a case of this person had no real connections to anyone. Oh no, but actually he was connected to the pastor, and there's this picture of them at the church, which they clearly missed, and Stevie was in that picture as well, and whatever. And it's just all of the convenient evidence comes at the end of the movie, and it wasn't a case of, oh, maybe there's something that links to Stevie somehow, but she's having to explain her way out of it, or she's trying to having to hide and manipulate what the evidence is presenting. Essentially, there isn't anything like that, or there isn't any evidence of oh, it could potentially be two people or something along the lines. It's just a case of we're just going around looking for clues, not really getting anywhere with it. And then we get all the information at the end of the movie, and it's just okay, how satisfying is that? And it's actually funny that in the last video, I was saying to Daniel, I was saying that with these mysteries, you always want it to be someone that you've seen on screen, someone that has been in the movie, whereas in the last one, it kind of just came out of nowhere. But if anything, it just made it feel worse. And it's not because the person was in the movie and we'd seen them and they'd gone unsuspected. It was just the mystery aspect of it. The element of piecing together some clues and trying to identify who it was just wasn't there. So then when you have the reveal, it's extremely unsatisfying.
Did I space out, or was it not explained why the pastor is a suspect?
Why was he a suspect again? I actually can't remember.
He appears in this photo, and they go to the church and kind of distract him, and then they find this book that's essentially a shrine to the guy who died, right? And so he certainly looks very guilty. but then he isn't. And I felt like I must have missed a line, like somebody talked behind me and I missed a line, and that explains why they go to the past in the first place. But is that there?
When you say they, do you mean the police or do you mean the actual cast? The
Ava
team?
and whoever else it was. Because the victim, what's the guy's name? Sam was Stevie's friend at rehab, and he was in the church group with their pastor, right? And so there are pictures of the victim and the pastor, right? And I think that is the red herring, right? That is actually the connection between him and Stevie, but they think it's the connection between him and the pastor, right? Is that it? Because that felt really rushed when I was watching it.
I'm trying to remember why. Like, how did they even find the picture of the pastor first and foremost? Like, I don't know. I'm blanking.
Well,
out
that
on
picture
part
was
of
at
the
the
movie
end that
as
they
well.
found it, though. I don't think they even saw. I don't think Ava and the group saw a picture of him. I think they discussed something and there was a revelation, but I don't think there was a picture. The picture was at the end, wasn't it? When we found out who the murderer was.
I'm trying to find it in the Wikipedia summary and I can't find it right now. So that kind of feels like a red herring again. And that makes just extra unsatisfying. The original kind of had this kind of pointless mystery, but we were finding out more about the fisherman, right? About this Ben guy, right? And more about his background and what he was doing that day when he was hit by the car and all of that, right? So it wasn't completely pointless. It was more like it's not about uncovering who the killer is because we already know who the killer is, or it's the person you suspect. But the investigation kind of reveals additional information that kind of fleshes out the background and with that what the situation is actually like. And here it felt more like misdirection. Like we actually have some movie time to fill, and we're just going to put in some distractions. And there's some other stuff in here too, right? Like the dream about. So first of all, this entire sequence where somehow this float that Helen was on in the first movie is in a shed in the exact graveyard where they're looking for who was at the grave of somebody, right? Keep forgetting the details. And the float 30 years later is in perfect condition. And that is kind of where Danica, I think, gets attacked. And then later on, is it Danica again who has a dream about Helen?
Yeah.
Which, with some of the worst CGI, somehow we've gone backwards since Rogue One. Actually, that part is related to the best part of the movie, which is when Sarah Michelle Gellar, who plays Helen, when she was asked by journalists whether or not she would be in the new movie, she said, "I'm dead. What do you think?" Turns out she answered the question, but didn't answer the question, which is kind of funny. But yeah, like that entire vision, if there was a point, I didn't notice it.
Like, why would she appear to Danica in this? Like, they had no connection at all, no correlation. It was just an excuse to get her into the movie because it was a character from the first movie, which is, again, why I say these legacy characters, it's just like, you didn't need them in this movie. And even to Julie, it was like, what was her point in this at all? And at one point, I thought they were going to go an interesting route where they were exploring trauma, where she was teaching about trauma and its effects on, different people. And I feel like there probably was a better story or a better or more interesting narrative in that between her and Ray and how you deal with trauma. And I feel like that could have been better explored in this movie, but it wasn't. But outside of her giving some exposition about, like the killer has to be someone close to the victim, for example, and her showing up at the end and stuff. I didn't really see the point in her, but it just felt mandatory to have her in there. And again, it's just more distraction as opposed to trying to build a good story and trying to move the franchise forward, which is extremely frustrating.
I actually found a theme in this that justifies why Julie and Ray are in this. So the first movie was very clean on theme, right? It's about trust and it's about class, and those two ideas drive the entire movie and every major character decision and every major character relationship and so on. And that is not really here, right? There's a whole bunch of different stuff here, but it's not driven in any way, like in quite the same way, by like a simple idea that then unfolds over the course of the story. But I did in fact find one theme, which is the idea of remembering. So One of the iconic images of this franchise is the whole thing about "I know what you did last summer," which is another way of saying "I remember what you did last summer." There are a whole bunch of manifestations of the idea of remembering. So if we go down the list, Julie is all about dealing with and managing trauma, right? And so she's made it her career to process her own experiences and then help other people to do the same. And then Southport as a town represses their memory, right? Their history. They pretend that nothing has happened, and they've kind of turned this into a kind of a touristy place, and their entire livelihood is conditioned on people not knowing about what happened, right? Which ties into Ray, who is kind of left out from that, and he is angry about being forgotten, right? Like his experiences are being erased, his experiences are being forgotten, and that is kind of his motivation for wanting to help Stevie. And then you've got Stevie, who is angry about Sam not being remembered the way he was, or something like that, right? Like where she remembers him as a friend and the others only remember him as some guy they killed on the road. And then you've got the podcast girl, Tyler, who turns the memories of what happened as it relates to other people's suffering into entertainment. So I did find that. And if it wasn't for the last third, I think you could have something here where this idea of the true crime podcast and erasing history and processing your trauma and all of these things are kind of variations on the idea of remembering, and specifically remembering bad things you did or that somebody else did to you. If the movie had leaned into that, I think I would be much higher on it. But they kind of drop kind of that whole thing like at the 2/3 mark, and we can talk about that, where it's a halfway decent slasher movie and it turns just silly. I think that's the next thing to talk about. But any thoughts on that theme and how that justifies Ray and Julie existing?
I definitely do agree with what you're saying, and that my next point was I felt like they were trying to. I don't even know if it has to be intentional because they were professional writers. However, because that fell flat, because because that fell flat, it's a thing where their integration in the film pretty much like dampened the movie. Is like it made the film worse. Because if it was a thing where they did execute that theme perfectly, then cool, their their existence in the storyline would have been justifiable. However, because they didn't follow on with the theme, I personally feel like their integration in the film, it just made the film worse. If you ask me, like at first, like I'm not against original cast members being in the film. However, usually whenever you see like an original cast member in the film, their role in the movie isn't really that big. It's just there for nostalgia and a bit of significance, right? Their characters were like literally incorporated in the film. Like if they weren't in the movie, then it wouldn't have been a film because they didn't execute that theme too well. Their existence in the film, it just ruined the film.
I don't know that I agree with that. I think including them in making that what I just described the motive. This is why Ray helps Stevie, and this is why Julie gets involved, right? Like this is not random. This is not simply showing up. I think Helen is very much just show up for the sake of showing up. But I think Ray and Julie, I think, are much more integral to the plot. And like you said, the plot doesn't work without them, right? And it also justifies why this is happening again. This justifies why somebody in a fisherman's outfit with a meat hook is going after these teenagers, because why else would it, right? It's not the same guy, right? And it's not the same grievance, and like it's not like a Michael Myers, what's the guy from Friday the 13th called? Jason Voorhees. These characters just keep coming, right? They're immortal, they're magical, they will just always keep coming, and every movie it's somebody different they go after. And that is not what's happening here, right? It's always personal, right? In the first movie, it was the victim himself, and here it was somebody taking on that persona to do justice for the victim who cannot achieve justice for himself. And they're motivated by wanting to remember what happened. So I do think that works. And if it had stayed at that level, I think it would have worked.
And you had the opportunity to tie it into real life experiences and making it current and making it modern, because again, a lot of what's discussed is about things like being erased and changing times. And again, for the older audience, it's like no one's ever happy with what comes after, or what's new, and everything's about like remembering back in my days, or remembering the good old times, etc. And even if you want to make it a little bit more political, it's like you can sort of kind of tie it into things like immigration, which people seem are quite passionate about these new people coming in and changing the way like things like run and stuff like that, and like erasing culture and erasing what made such and such and whatever. And it's like, that was an opportunity to have some type of, and again, not every movie needs to have like deep social commentary, but it's just like keeping up with the current times and like actually having something to say about today's, society in today's day and age. But I just think that they, one, missed a trick by not following through with the theme, because I think that's actually a strong theme to have in the movie. I think it's like again, like I said, a reason to justify having the legacy characters in there because they feed into the theme, but it's also a way to actually make it current and make it modern and make it sort of make people think about today's day and age, and make it a little bit more relatable in that sense. But I don't see that they managed to do that in this movie.
And how does Stevie fit into that? Because I'll be honest, when she took off the hat and revealed her identity, I had already checked out. I already was not taking it seriously. It didn't help that her one line that justifies her motive was kind of drowned out by the audience I was with. So like it just had no impact on me at all.
Firstly, her motive, I was a bit confused because number one, when she revealed herself, that's when like I think finding out that Ray helped her kind of saved my opinion from going to this is hot doo-doo to an okay film. I'll be honest with you, because if she was just the murderer, I would have been like, that's when I was pissed. I'll be honest with you. I was like, I can't believe they just, like I said, keep themselves in the balls. Even with Ray, when I found out that he was another one that was helping, I was like, okay, cool. That makes it more believable, but it's still, their reasoning is a bit, I just didn't really like it. But yeah, in terms of her motivations behind it, I was a bit confused because I don't get how the group were responsible for pretty much her downfall. They said, of course, that the person that was driving the car was her boyfriend or someone that was helping her, or something like that, right?
Her friend.
Her friend. Okay.
The guy who died in the car wreck was Sam, who was her friend in rehab.
Yeah.
Like at the beginning of the movie, we are told that she kind of went through a rough time, went to rehab, and at the start of the movie, she's kind of putting her life back together. She's working for Ray, which we don't know at the time, but she's got a job, and she kind of reunites with these friends, and these friends then ruin her life again by killing her, like one of her few friends, right? It's about revenge. It's about taking revenge for the loss of her only friend on the people who killed him and who also didn't care enough to actually help, because during the accident, Stevie, I think, keeps saying we should try to help. One of them says, like, what are we going to do? Just climb down the cliff and then carry him back up the cliff? Like, the paramedics are on their way. What else can we do? And she basically blames them for his death.
But also, it felt like she was blaming them for more. Like, it felt like she was blaming them for the downfall of pretty much her life, right? And that, for me personally, that's why I was a bit confused. I'm like, but everything that happened to you, they had nothing to do with it. It felt like there was some sort of, like, even with her introduction, right, in the beginning of the scene, I understand, obviously, they moved away and they moved on with their lives and they were living their lives and she was stuck in a town. I get that. But it still felt like that was a part of the underlying anger that she had towards the group. Of course, yeah, she wants to get back. She wants to revenge for obviously what they did to Sam. But at the same time, it still felt like she was blaming them for how bad her life was, either because they left and then they didn't come back and check out or whatever. I'm not too sure. So that's why, for me personally, I just felt like, even though her main motivation behind what she did was because of Sam, that was weak. However, I thought as well that she blamed them for her downfall, which makes it even weaker. So overall, I just think her motivation was weak. It just wasn't a strong enough reason for her to do everything that she was doing. I was just, like, she didn't even give any signs that she was murderous. You know what I'm saying? She just gave, in the beginning, it was like she was weird, yeah, kind of like a tiny, not even a tiny bit weird. She was even weird, actually. I take that back. She was more like reluctant to chill with them. So she was very like standoffish in the beginning, which makes sense because obviously, like, you know, she hasn't seen them in years. So, but she didn't give any inkling or sign that she had any animosity or anger towards them. That, like, there was nothing. There was no sign, nothing. So that's why I was a bit, like, when I found out it was her, I was like, number one, it was convenient how they found out.
Everything she does a year later, I think, is an act. It's a way to get close to them so that she knows where they are and what they're thinking so that she can plan the next attack. I think that is something you need to take into account. Like during the night of the accident, she is very much distraught and she's basically talked into not saying anything by, I think it's Teddy primarily, but like the entire group, but primarily Teddy. Essentially, Teddy says, like, my dad owns the town. He's going to make this go away. And she doesn't want it to go away. She wants justice for her friend, although I'm not entirely sure at what point she knows that it's her friend, because I don't remember her recognizing him during the accident. Like, she doesn't recognize his car or anything like that. But like the year later, when they come for the second wedding, I think everything she does is an act.
Would you not have even recognized the car? Like, if you were so close to this person, like you say in this movie, and this person meant everything to you, would you not have recognized the car that they were driving, or the license plate, or whatever? Like, it just doesn't. It doesn't make sense in that part. And the reason that I was saying, at the top of this review about how they may have like changed who the killer was because you have that scene between Ray and what's the name, Stevie, in his bar, I believe it is, and she's like distraught, and she's like, crying about someone being after her friends, and it's just like, there is no one else around. It's just you two. You don't need to, like, there is no need for you to put an act on in this particular scene, but you're doing it just for the audience and not because it makes sense in the movie, and to just kind of throw people off. And I feel like that's poor writing. That's not clever writing at all. If it was your intention for it to be them two from the start, terrible writing. Another part like I didn't like about terrible writing is that I know in like today's day and age where we have like phones, cameras, and this, that, and the other, that it makes it a little bit harder to kind of get away with murder and not be seen and stuff like that. But the fact that people's phones kept dying and batteries kept dying at convenient points in this movie, or like they didn't have signal, it's just like, can you think of like a little bit more of a clever way? Like, again, you're meant to be creative in your writing, and you have to be creative in the way that you tackle modern problems. And that was just like another thing that I didn't like in the movie at all. And then when you got into Ray's reasoning for doing it, it's like, okay, she asked for help, and I wanted to remind the town about what happened 30 years ago, and it was just like, okay.
There's a little bit more to it. He's not simply angry that he's not allowed to talk about it, or it's this whole idea that the entire town has this conspiracy of silence, where they've all agreed to forget about the most traumatic thing that ever happened to him. Nobody's talking about it, nobody's acknowledging it. They're actively, like, at one point they say Teddy's father scrubbed it from the entire internet, which it's nonsense, but whatever. But it's the resentment of being left alone. That's his motive.
What does he want people to do? Like, the town's dying because of it. People don't want to move there. People don't want to buy houses because there was this serial killer on the loose however many years ago. What do you gain? And I get it, like, it's recognition or like people remembering what happened to you or whatever, but it's like, really? Like, I don't know. Maybe I'm looking at it from my perspective and not from his perceived perspective in this movie.
It forces people to acknowledge what happened. Because if there's another killing and the killer is dressed up in this strange costume, people are going to start asking questions, and then maybe somebody remembers, oh, didn't this happen like 28 years ago? How come nobody's talking about this? Like this is a way to crack this open, to kind of break the silence, to make it impossible to maintain the silence.
Once the silence is broken and everyone knows, okay, this happened 30 years ago, what does he want people to do at that point? Like, what's your end goal? Is it just for people to acknowledge it happened? It's like, okay, it happened. Where do we go from here? And again, it could have been linked to the trauma aspect of it, and something along the lines of like misery loves company, and he wants everyone to kind of like feel what he felt because he felt alone at that time. Because again, another point that we made in the first movie was that it didn't feel like the town was reacting to what was happening. It didn't feel like the town was reacting to people disappearing and dying. Whereas in this movie, you could feel a little bit more. So I don't know whether that was intentional in the first movie, or if they remembered it in this particular movie. But you could have kind of tied it to something along those lines of like, when someone's like down, miserable and whatever like that, they kind of want to spread it. But there wasn't that end goal there to justify him wanting people to just acknowledge that something happened. And to me, I won't understand it. It just doesn't make sense how that's your whole shtick. And it's like, okay, after people say, yes, this happened 30 years ago, now what? Like, the town can't move on. The town can't try to move past it. The town can't try to rebuild itself and attract tourists. Or do you want everyone to suffer because something happened to you 30 years ago? And there isn't enough depth there for me to really relate to it or really to understand his perspective on it.
I just can relate to this bite. This whole, you are not treating it fairly, so I'm going to make you. That is something that I can understand. But, it's kind of, you're kind of right that, okay, once they have to acknowledge that this happened, then what? But that kind of then presumably leads to follow-up questions, and stuff would happen after it becomes public knowledge again. But yeah, I don't know. For me, it works.
Here's a solution for him. Tell people that you murdered that person 30 years ago and go sit in a prison cell for it. That's your solution. And then people can acknowledge it happened. And here's an unsolved crime, and you have a whole documentary about it. That's your solution to it. As opposed to, oh, the same thing conveniently happened 30 years later, and this person needs my help to get revenge, and because I swore to her father that I'll like take care. And this is not even the best way. Like, if I leave my kids under the guidance of someone else and I say take care of them, and they go on a murder spree with that person, I'm haunting you for the rest of your life, because what the hell are you doing with my child? Like, how is that the best course of action for the kid? Aside from that, because this kid come up to you and said, I need your help, and because you sworn to like help and protect them, that you go on this murder spree with them, it's just like, it's not making sense. And the motivations, like for me, they just are just so weak, and they just don't land, and they're just frustrating, and they're just very underwhelming, because you could have done something better there.
There is some kind of class solidarity there, right? Because Stevie, like Ray, is kind of the working class kind of standout from the group, right? Like everybody else is off to have these glamorous lives, and Danica and Teddy specifically are just ridiculous in their decadence, right? And so Stevie definitely does not fit in, and she definitely is not one of the crowd, right? They kind of ask her to come along in the beginning, kind of out of obligation, because it would feel mean to not invite her, because they used to be friends, a long time ago, and that's a theme song to one of my favorite shows. So I'm gonna stop here, but the I can kind of see the solidarity, but yeah, it's a little bit like it is a horror movie villain motivation, right? It does not quite hold up. And as you were talking, I found another plot hole. Why does he kill the podcaster?
I was literally about to say that.
Isn't her being in the town exactly what Ray wants?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly the point I was going to make afterwards, was that her whole stick of her whole being there was because she wanted to blow the lid on this, and she was like investigating this town and uncovering what happened 30 years ago. Why did she need to die? And again, like in the last movie, I said, why did the side characters die? Because it didn't make sense as to the plot of the story and the revenge, and it was never really understood why other people had to die outside of the main group. This one, it makes a little bit more sense if he's trying to spread fear and trying to spread trauma around the town. Like, Danica's new husband was a bit unfortunate. Like, as he was dying, I was a bit like, why is he dying? Like, why are we going after him? And yeah, Tyler was another one. And again, after the motivations are revealed, it's a bit more of that one just doesn't make sense whatsoever as to why you would kill her. And again, on Ray's part, he probably doesn't know who she is, but if he's getting the information, like he would be getting the information from the group to know where they are and to know what they're doing. He would be needing to get information from Stevie as to what the group's doing. So if he knew that Ava was going with this podcaster to do this to explore this place where the killings originally happened, then you kind of know what her shtick is and what her deal is, so you don't need to kill her in this movie.
Everybody knows what true crime podcasts are, and 2 minutes of Googling will tell you that this person has an audience. And if she tells the story of the of the Southport hook killer, it's out, right? Like I think that's a major flaw. And in fact, she should have been invited by Ray. And then the killings happen, and she's right there to witness it. And it's her biggest series of her podcast ever, right? And then it kind of turns out that she's being manipulated by Ray, maybe, to kind of tell this story, but on Ray's terms, right? So that actually could have been kind of interesting, because that is something that didn't exist in 1997.
The only thing I can think of is maybe they were scared that she, because she's a journalist, so she could have revealed their identity, even though everyone else in the group were pretty much looking for, they were trying to find out who, the actual killer was. But with her specifically, because she's a journalist, maybe they saw her as a threat when it comes to just kind of keeping them a secret.
Yeah, but if we're talking about this whole motivation of make it public, blow this thing wide open, sunlight is the best disinfectant, and then you kill the person who wields the disinfectant, that's kind of weird. One last topic I want to talk about is how silly the third act is, right? There's just so much stuff in this. There's the perfectly preserved float from 30 years ago that we've mentioned. There's the dream with Helen, right? So I think it makes sense that Danica kind of relates to Helen, because they kind of have a similar kind of background, a little like their niche in the group is kind of similar. But why does she dream about Helen warning her about something? And why does Helen die in the dream? Like, what does it mean exactly? Part of my problem is there might be meaning here, but the movie has not convinced me that there is one, right? Like, this just seems like random stuff happening for the sake of being weird. And then there's other stuff like, this must have been Teddy, where he goes to the gym and his justification is, I want to bulk up so I'm in shape next time the killer attacks. First of all, I'm pretty sure when you are burned out from your workout, that's the last thing you want to be when you have to run for your life. I don't know. Am I
But
crazy?
nah, you're not. But I can't believe you didn't mention when Teddy could have killed the fisherman, but chose not to and walked away and then ended up getting killed. The scene where he was literally beating up the fisherman, I thought, was that straight after the gym scene?
Was it the wine cellar or the graveyard? Oh, no, there was
Oh.
one stupid one actually in the graveyard where he tackles the fisherman in the graveyard, and then the fisherman magically appears at the door and runs out after being tackled.
That's where he turns into Michael Myers, right? Because he can just
Yeah.
he can just survive anything, and he just disappears when it's convenient, and then the speed at which he disappears is unrealistic. There's even like a sound effect of footsteps running away, right? like some Looney Tunes cartoon. It's crazy. So like the reason I'm kind of discombobulated here is that there's so many weird details. I can't even keep them straight. And then there's the whole thing about the sauna. Look, you are being hunted by like a killer, and so you go to the sauna, and there's a guy it must have been Ray, right? Can't have been Stevie, because there's a guy who's very clearly the killer. The face was obscured, but so he's in the sauna. There's one other guy there. That guy's face is shrouded in fog, right? And Teddy closes his eyes for a second. First of all, why? Like points, like 5 points for having your back against the wall so you can't be attacked, right? So that's next level thinking already. But he's going to the sauna, he's closing his eyes. There's no second exit, right? Like if he was cornered by the killer in that moment, it would be game over. And then there's one other guy there. He lets his guard down, closes his eyes. When he opens it, the guy is gone. And somebody wrote on the glass, "You're next," or something like that, like some kind of threat. So it has to be that guy. But if it is, okay, here's another plot hole. If it is, then it has to be either Ray or Stevie, right? So it has to be Ray. But why does he not recognize Ray? This is tradition in this franchise at this point, right? Where they do stuff that feels a little bit creepy but makes zero sense. It's like the last scene of the first movie where somebody goes after Julie in the shower after the killer has been killed, and it's just there to look kind of cool if you don't think about it. And I think here they're doing it again. Again, they have a scene in the sauna this time. And like the more I think about it, the less sense it makes.
Here's how they make it even worse, and they've skipped over all the evidence, is if the person is at your gym, what do you then do? One, Ray shouldn't even be at the same gym as Teddy. They shouldn't have the same membership. For sure, they shouldn't have the same membership. Just
True.
because one's come from like a lot of money and one's like low class. But if they do go to the same gym, okay, you know the killer goes to the gym or visited that day. One, you look at all the cameras. Two, you try and investigate. Your dad's got power. You investigate who has a membership at the gym or who visited that day. And then three, the most egregious one where I saw it happen and I was like, okay, then there's something to work off here, is when Ava slashes the fisherman in the back and there's blood on the knife. And I'm like, you have DNA evidence as to who this person is, and they do absolutely nothing with it whatsoever up until the last point, only for her to realize that Ray is the killer because he had some type of scar or something like that on his back. And that's when you remember that she slashed him in the back. And it's like, you have all the evidence.
Which he doesn't hide. He doesn't hide his wound. I think he kind of walks away from her saying, "I'm going to get something." And then she realizes he's got the bandage on the shoulder exactly where she stabbed him. Is that her? That must be Ava, right? At that point, right? If he knows that, why is he not hiding it? Just to mess with her?
Even though he said, "Now you know who I am, I can't just let you go," so he implied that he was going to let her go.
At that point, he hadn't revealed himself, right? Ava had come to Ray for help, and he says, "Yeah, I'm going to help you. I'm going to go get something." And then he walks away and she sees the shoulder wound, and that is where she puts two and two together. And then he comes back, and I think he realizes that he's been found out, and then he says something like what you just said.
Do you want to know what makes that even worse? Is you've just survived the boat with the fisherman. Your friend's gone overboard because she's been stabbed, and you haven't gone to the police to report it. You haven't gone to the police to say this and this happened, this was the killer, whatever. You text Julie and be like, "Oh, it was Stevie," and you go back to Ray to his bar, and it's like, how does that make sense? And your friend then washes up on shore, like by herself, and it's somehow,
the way,
I don't know how she was alive.
Bro, even the freaking ending pissed me off. They're acting like they didn't lose all their ex-boyfriends, their boyfriends, and the way that they were just busting joke, mate. Like they acted like they did, like their friends weren't deceased. At the end, I was thinking,
and
what
then
the
had the
frick?
and then had the nerve to say that men need to go to therapy. Like, wasn't Stevie also the psycho killer in this movie? It's like, okay, what? I was like, all right, man, cool, makes sense.
I guess they must have meant Ray, right? Where if only he had gone to therapy, none of this would have happened. But yeah, it's like it's completely unearned. Really took me out. Kind of made me actually angry at the movie a little bit. It's like such a 2017 line. It's just that's not the story. It's not justified by the story. That's not what the movie has been about. And to just bring that out kind of in the last minute of the movie, I was not a fan of. It's really crazy. Like, it feels like a different movie, right? Like, the entire last act is just full of nonsense like this. And like the last 10, 15 minutes we've been talking, it's kind of been kind of borderline incoherent because we're trying to piece together all the nonsense that's in this movie. And it's completely ridiculous. Like, it does feel like it was directed by somebody else.
I have one more. Teddy says to them, why don't we jump on the boat and leave here until this thing blows over? The movie didn't convince me that there was anything tying any of them to the town or any reason why any of them needed to stay in the town. Especially like Ava as well, because she'd just flown in from wherever she'd been as well. And it's like, all of this crazy stuff's happening. Why don't you all leave? Like, I mean, they had this bright idea that they should all stay at Danica's house. And it's like, even to that point, is that he's got this massive boat, which everyone can clearly stay on. Why not all sleep on the river? Like, you just like take your boat out on shore and like anchor it out at sea or something like that, where the killer just can't roll up on you unless it's like in a boat and then you can then see them coming. But it was just like, don't introduce stuff in the movie, and then they do try to do it at the end of the movie. They do try to get on the boat and leave at the end of the movie, only for Stevie to be the killer. And it's like, what are we doing? Like, why? Like, what? Like, again, like, and I know you have to have like the rich teens, the rich obnoxious teens, and they're the ones that get away with everything, and that daddy has money. But it's like, then you have to make it like, you have to then think it through throughout the whole movie. Why are they still there? Why haven't they left? Like, again, for someone, especially for someone like Teddy, who you've broken up with your girlfriend and you're not with her anymore, she's about to get married to someone else and whatever. Like, why are you still even in this town? Like, you have no ties to it. Go fly somewhere or something like that. I don't know. That was just like another one where someone said they should all get on the boat and leave, and I was like, that's the best thing anyone said in this movie so far. I don't know why you haven't done it.
Yeah, it's weird. Like, nothing. Like, at that point, nothing makes sense, and it's purely there to create some images that are borderline entertaining, but they're not because they don't mean anything, right? They're not tied to, the reality of these characters. And so why would you care? Like, I honestly stopped. Like, I was totally on board. Like, I was even enjoying like the decadence of Danica and Teddy, right? In the beginning, this really absurd, completely unhinged luxury that they live in. And I kind of enjoyed that a little bit. Actually was totally on board with the movie when, like, the very first shot of the movie is, or one of the first shots is when, I think, when Ava arrives at the wedding, or at, like, it's like the rehearsal or something, and there's like a banner that says something like Danica and Teddy get hooked. You see that?
Oh, no, I didn't see that.
I was like, okay, now the movie is talking my language. It's like, let's do this, and then this happens.
Seems like we've reached the end, guys. Any last thoughts?
I think this movie was a little bit misguided, lacked real direction, didn't have. I don't think it had a solid idea as to what it wanted to be, which is unfortunate. I feel like it missed a massive trick on bringing this franchise to a newer audience and refreshing the idea of or the premise of the franchise. And again, I'll compare it to Final Destination because that's another movie from near enough the same time that came back in 2025, and of course it's not a perfect movie, but it brought new ideas to the franchise, brought fresh ideas, nailed its theme, nailed its premise really well, had some really great kills in it. And now I'm like reviewing Final Destination, but one other thing it did was, even like when it did bring back a legacy character, one, it added depth to that character and it made that character serve the plot in the best way possible without, overbearing, without taking over what the movie was. Whereas, like, I feel like in this movie, again, like, legacy characters are there and it kind of detracts from the movie. It doesn't add anything of real value to the movie, in my opinion. It missed the trick of potentially doing that by not following through in its themes and its ideas around sort of remembering and trauma and things like that. Ultimately, it's to me anyways, it wasn't that fun either. I don't think I even had that much fun with any of the kills. It just seems like it was reworked many times, and it feels reworked in its sort of execution, in its dialogue, in its scenes, and things like that. So very unfortunate, but I feel like this is my jumping off point with the franchise. So I give it a 3 out of 10.
Like I said, I'm more so disappointed because I think they just shot themselves in the foot. I don't even know if that was intentional, to be fair. Because it did feel like we were watching 2, potentially 3 movies. First part really good, which felt like a film on its own. Second part was becoming dodgy, and then the third part was just shambolic. So I am disappointed because, like I said, it did start off really good, and I had high hopes for it because it didn't feel like. I wouldn't say it didn't feel like a typical slasher because it did, but it did just, like I said, it just felt a bit more mature and it felt more realistic in the beginning, and just in terms of the performance, and in terms of the setup, and in terms of just the way that the storyline was shaping up. And I do commend them for trying to do something new with the whole murder mystery thing, while trying to kind of like keep the identity of the franchise, even though it may not have worked for some. I didn't have an issue with it, too fair. I didn't mind it was turning to a murder mystery. However, it did end up collapsing. So I do commend them for trying something new, but at the same time, it didn't work, unfortunately. So overall, Act 3 was just the main problem. So I'm gonna give this one a 4.5 out of 10. I think if I give it a 5, then 5 means average. This was an average-ish film, but it's just like I said, the Act 3 was just like I said, Act 3 was just a madness. So I'm gonna have to give it a 4.5. So it's near average. Is a near average experience that I had with this film. So yeah.
So I like a whole bunch of the pieces. I think the characters are fine. I'm fine with most of the kills. There's a decent variety to them. Thematically, the idea of remembering and remembering the trauma is an interesting idea. It ties into like the kind of the hook of the franchise, if you will. It justifies bringing back the legacy characters. Generally, legacy sequels, I think, are way overdone. Most of them don't do anything with it. Final Destination is kind of the one this year that actually succeeded, and this one didn't. If it wasn't for the silliness of the third act, I think this could have actually been at least decent. Where I would say, this is fine. It's okay. It doesn't break any boundaries, but it's okay. It's enjoyable. But because of the third act, where everything falls apart and characters just start doing the most ridiculous and the dumbest things you can imagine, it simply does not hold together, and it ends up amounting to not very much. So for that reason, it's a 5 out of 11 for me.
All right, guys. Thank you very much for tuning into today's discussion. I feel like we're in unison.
If you reached this part of the episode, of course, thank you very much for working with us. We appreciate your support, as always. If you liked what you heard today and you enjoyed our discussion, you should probably tell a friend. And if you hated everything and you thought we were chatting a bunch of nonsense, you should probably tell an enemy. We are the Eye of the Storm podcast.
All right, guys. Thank you very much, and we will catch you next week. Au revoir.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.